Ever feel like you just keep digging a deeper hole, when things go wrong?
Yeah.
Like your pride is like stopping you from doing like what's actually best.
Oh, yeah.
That's exactly what we're diving into today.
Okay.
We're going to explore how to deal with failure,
Mm-hmm.
specifically when ego gets in the way.
Right.
And we're using Ego as the Enemy by Ryan Holiday as our guide.
A great book.
Yeah, have you read this one?
I have, yeah. It's a really interesting look at how ego can sabotage us in all areas of life.
Yeah. And it's not just about like those big public failures,
Yeah. Right.
like the ones we see with celebrities or
Yeah.
big companies.
Yeah.
It's about those everyday struggles we all face.
Exactly. It's a universal struggle, isn't it?
Yeah.
We all face setbacks, but sometimes our reactions, fueled by ego, can make those setbacks so much worse.
Okay, so let's jump right into like a really dramatic example.
Okay.
The story of John DeLorean.
Oh, yeah.
The guy behind that iconic car from Back to the Future.
Of course.
So his real life's basically a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Straight out of Ego as the Enemy.
Mm-hmm.
His company was tanking.
Right.
But instead of facing reality, he made like a series of increasingly bad choices.
Yeah.
Even got involved in a drug deal.
Yeah. That's a wild story.
What's fascinating to me, though,
Yeah.
is that even though he was eventually acquitted on entrapment charges, his reputation and his company were already like shattered.
Right.
It seems like the more he tried to save himself, like the worse things got.
Yeah, that's a classic example of what Holiday calls the destructive cycle of ego. Failure happens, our ego resists admitting fault, we double down on bad decisions, and ultimately the problem just gets bigger.
Yeah.
DeLorean's story is extreme, but think about how this plays out in our own lives.
Right.
We've all been in that situation where we refuse to back down in an argument.
Oh, yeah?
Even when we know we're wrong, just because our pride is on the line.
It's like we're emotionally invested in being right.
Yeah.
Even if it means digging ourselves deeper into a hole.
Totally.
But Ego as the Enemy also offers some inspiring examples
Okay.
of people who managed to break free from this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Jobs, for instance. Getting fired from Apple, the company he built, was a huge blow. You can imagine how that must have like bruised his ego.
Initially, he did react emotional, as anyone would. But what's important is that he eventually used that experience as an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
He took what Holiday calls a full stop,
Okay.
a phrase borrowed from Alexander Hamilton.
Okay, I like that.
It's not about giving up. It's about having the courage to pause,
Right.
assess the situation honestly,
Yeah.
and avoid those knee-jerk reactions that often make things worse.
So instead of spiraling, Jobs stepped back, took stock, and eventually came back stronger.
Exactly.
And I think that's a key takeaway here.
Yeah.
Failure doesn't have to be the end. It can actually be a turning point if we approach it with the right mindset.
Totally agree.
But honestly, sometimes it feels like even Jobs' success story is a bit exceptional.
Yeah.
There's so many cautionary tales out there.
Unfortunately, you're right. Look at Dove Charney in American Apparel. The company was in trouble, and they offered him a pretty generous exit package.
Really?
He could have stepped down as CEO, stayed involved creatively, and still made a good living.
Wow.
But his ego wouldn't let him go. He fought tooth and nail to retain control, leading to expensive legal battles, tons of bad press, and eventually the company's collapse.
It's heartbreaking because the people he claimed to champion,
Right.
the workers, ended up suffering the most.
Yeah.
It seems like his need to protect his image and be right ended up costing him everything.
It's a perfect example of how ego can blind us to the bigger picture and ultimately lead to self-destruction. And this is where it gets really fascinating. You see a similar pattern with Alcibiades in ancient Greece. His ego led him to betray Athens, then Sparta, then Persia, all in an attempt to protect himself. Wow.
It highlights a dark side of ego, how it can drive us to betray even our deepest values and the people we care about most. All in the name of self-preservation.
Right.
But how do we break free from this pattern?
Right. It's one thing to analyze these high-profile cases, but what does all this mean for us? The everyday folks trying to navigate our own challenges and setbacks.
That's the core question.
Yeah.
And that's where we'll start digging deeper in the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, stay with us.
Yeah.
We're about to unpack some practical strategies for taming that inner ego and turning those oops moments into opportunities for growth.
Absolutely.
So we've seen how, like, unchecked ego can lead to some pretty epic disasters.
Yeah.
But how do we actually prevent that from happening,
Right.
in our own lives?
Mm-hmm.
Because ego's the enemy isn't just about pointing fingers at famous failures.
Yeah.
It also offers some really practical advice.
Yeah. On how to deal with these situations.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the key takeaways
Mm-hmm.
you think our listeners should focus on?
Well, one of the most important things is understanding the concept of alive time versus dead time.
Okay.
It's easy to fall into a trap of passively consuming information
Right.
or entertainment when things aren't going well.
Yeah.
But that's what Holiday calls dead time.
Okay.
Instead, we need to focus on active engagement with the world,
Mm-hmm.
what he calls alive time.
So instead of binge watching Netflix after a setback,
Yeah.
we should be out there, I don't know, building birdhouses,
Mhm.
writing poetry, learning a new language.
It doesn't have to be that elaborate.
Okay.
It's not necessarily about taking on huge new projects.
Right.
It's more about shifting your focus
Mhm.
from passive consumption
Yeah.
to active creation and connection,
Okay.
even in small ways.
So it could be as simple as tackling a neglected chore,
Right.
reconnecting with a friend,
Exactly.
or spending time in nature.
Yeah.
The key is to do something that gives you a sense of purpose and progress,
Mm-hmm.
something that helps you move forward rather than dwell in negativity.
Right.
I see. So it's not about the specific activity itself,
Yeah.
but the mindset behind it.
Exactly.
It's about choosing to direct your energy in a positive, productive way,
Mm-hmm.
rather than letting yourself get stuck in a rut.
That's it. And this ties into another key principle: cultivating a beginner's mindset.
Okay.
Ego often traps us in a cycle of thinking we know everything,
Right.
that we're beyond making mistakes.
Yeah.
But that's when we're most vulnerable to those big ego-driven blunders.
It's when we stop questioning,
Mm-hmm.
stop being curious,
Right.
that we become blind to our own flaws and biases.
That's
So
right.
ego is the enemy, encourages us to approach every challenge,
Yeah.
even in areas where we're experienced, with
Yeah.
a sense of humility and openness to learning.
It's about actively seeking feedback,
Yeah.
even if it's uncomfortable, and being willing to consider different perspectives.
But what happens when those challenges feel truly overwhelming?
Mm-hmm.
When it seems like no amount of alive time or beginner's mindset can change the situation?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's where things can get really tough. Because let's face it,
Yeah.
sometimes life throws us curveballs we just can't control.
Wow.
The economy tanks, a pandemic hits.
Someone we love gets sick.
Exactly. How do we deal with those moments when it feels like everything's spinning out of control?
Yeah, that's where it's so easy to let our ego take over.
Right. That's where the Stoic philosophers
Okay.
offer some valuable insights.
Okay.
They emphasize focusing on what we can control, our own responses and actions,
Yeah.
rather than external events or
Mhm.
other people's opinions.
Right.
Holiday calls this embracing amor fati, a love of fate.
Love of fate sounds a bit extreme.
Yeah.
Like we should just passively accept whatever happens.
It's not about that. It's
I
not
know.
about denying the difficulty of a situation.
Right.
Right, but rather recognizing that challenges are an inevitable part of life.
Yeah.
Instead of resisting them, we can choose to see them as opportunities for learning and resilience building.
So it's not about pretending everything's fine.
No.
It's about shifting our perspective,
Yeah,
finding a way to grow and learn, even when things are tough.
exactly.
It reminds me of that Nietzsche quote, "That which doesn't kill us makes us stronger."
That's a great way to put it.
But it's not just about becoming stronger in a physical sense.
Right.
It's about developing emotional and mental resilience.
Mhm.
It's about learning to navigate the ups and downs of life with grace and wisdom.
And that brings us to another point that Holiday emphasizes: remembering memento mori,
Okay.
the fact that we are all mortal.
I can see how that might seem a bit morbid at first,
Yeah.
but how does that tie into dealing with failure and ego?
Well, when we remember our own mortality,
Mhm.
it helps us shift our priorities.
Okay.
We become less fixated on external validation
Mm-hmm.
and more focused on living a life of purpose and meaning.
Yeah.
It helps us see through the illusions of ego
Mm-hmm.
and focus on what truly matters.
So it's a reminder to make the most of our time,
Yeah,
to act with intention,
right.
and not get bogged down by the fleeting nature of success and failure.
Exactly. But this all seems to hinge on a crucial distinction: the difference between our principles and our reputation.
Okay.
Ego is the enemy. highlights how often we prioritize our reputation, how others see us over our core principles.
Yeah.
But a reputation built on appearances is fragile. It can be shattered by the slightest setback.
Right.
Our principles, on the other hand, provide a much stronger foundation.
So it's about doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching.
Right.
And ironically, that kind of authenticity often leads to a more genuine and lasting reputation.
Absolutely.
But how do we actually cultivate this principle-driven approach in our daily lives?
Well, Holiday suggests starting with a simple exercise.
Okay.
Regularly reflecting on our values.
Okay.
What are the core principles that guide our decisions?
Yeah.
It's like having a personal mission statement
Right.
that helps us stay aligned with our true selves.
That makes sense, but it's not enough to just write it down and forget about it.
No, absolutely not.
It's about actively revisiting those principles.
Yeah.
Especially when we're facing tough choices.
Exactly. And that's where self-reflection becomes so important.
Right.
We need to regularly examine our thoughts, motivations, and actions.
Yeah.
We need to ask ourselves tough questions about where ego might be influencing our choices.
I imagine that kind of self-reflection can be pretty uncomfortable at times.
It can be.
It's not always easy to confront our own flaws and biases.
Right.
What are some practical ways to make that process a little less daunting?
Well, journaling and meditation can be incredibly valuable tools.
Okay.
They provide a dedicated space to process our experiences, identify patterns in our thinking, and gain insights into how ego might be subtly influencing our decisions.
But sometimes it's hard to be objective about ourselves.
Yeah.
Maybe we need like an outside perspective to help us see things more clearly.
You're right. Having a trusted mentor or friend, someone who can offer honest feedback and challenge our assumptions, can be invaluable.
It's like having an external accountability partner to help us stay on track.
Exactly.
It's interesting how all these strategies seem to like connect. We've got a live time, a beginner's mindset, the stoic approach to challenges, defining our principles, and now the importance of self-reflection and seeking wise counsel.
It all works together.
It feels like they all reinforce each other.
They absolutely do. And there's one more piece to this puzzle, which we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. The importance of surrounding ourselves with the right people.
Okay, yeah, because who we spend time with has a huge influence on our thoughts, behaviors, and even our values.
Absolutely. Stay tuned because we're about to unpack how our social circles can either fuel our ego or help us stay grounded and true to ourselves.
Okay, cool. I'm excited to dive into that. So we've talked about like the dangers of ego.
Yeah.
Especially when dealing with failure.
Right.
We've explored some powerful strategies for keeping it in check, but knowing is only half the battle, right?
Absolutely.
How do we actually put all this wisdom into action in our daily lives?
That's the key, isn't it? Turning knowledge into action. And ego is the enemy. Offer some very practical techniques for doing just that. One that really stands out is the idea of visualizing failure.
Visualizing failure.
Yeah.
That sounds kind of counterintuitive.
Right.
Shouldn't we be focusing on success?
That's what our ego wants us to believe. But when we only imagine the best case scenario, we set ourselves up for disappointment. And potentially even bigger mistakes when things inevitably don't go as planned.
So it's not about being pessimistic or dwelling on negativity.
No.
It's more about being realistic and acknowledging that setbacks are normal.
Yeah.
A normal part of life.
Yeah.
And it's better to be prepared.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By mentally rehearsing potential challenges and obstacles, we can equip ourselves to handle them with more grace and resilience when they do arise. Holiday describes it as a pre-mortem for your goals.
Okay.
You think through what could go wrong, where your weak points might be, and even external factors you can't control.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's like a fire drill for your life.
Right.
You're not hoping for a fire.
Right.
But you practice the evacuation plan just in case.
Exactly.
What are some other ways we can prepare ourselves for those inevitable stumbles?
This may sound counterintuitive as well, but Holiday suggests embracing constraints.
Constraints, you mean limitations.
Yeah.
Those are the things we're usually trying to like overcome. Right?
Our ego might tell us that, yes.
Yeah.
But constraints can actually be incredibly powerful catalysts for creativity and resourcefulness.
I'm intrigued how so.
Think about it. When we have unlimited resources, unlimited time, unlimited options, it's easy to get overwhelmed and paralyzed by indecision.
Right.
But when we have clear boundaries, we're forced to focus our energy and get inventive.
That's like the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
Constraints force us to think outside the box.
Yeah.
To find new solutions within those limitations.
Precisely. Holiday uses examples like the haiku with its strict syllable count or the sonnet with its specific rhyme scheme. These constraints, rather than hindering creativity, actually enhance it.
It's like a sculptor working with a specific block of marble. The limitations of the material actually shape and guide the creative process.
Exactly.
Forcing the artist to work within those boundaries.
So how can we apply this to our own lives?
Yeah.
Start by identifying the constraints you're facing in a particular project or situation.
Okay.
Maybe it's a tight budget, a deadline, or a lack of certain skills.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing these as roadblocks, reframe them as creative challenges.
So ask yourself, how can I achieve my goal within these limitations?
Yeah.
Constraints can actually push us to be more resourceful and innovative.
Right. And this ties back to something we discussed earlier.
Okay.
The importance of the full stop. Remember, it's not just about pausing in the face of failure.
Right.
It's also about regularly stepping back to assess our progress and make adjustments as needed.
Because even with the best plans and intentions, things change. The world throws us curveballs.
Yeah.
We gain new information.
Exactly. So it's crucial to make reflection a regular practice. Take some time each week or even each day to review your goals, your progress, your approach. Ask yourself, are my actions still aligned with my desired outcomes? Do I need to course correct? What have I learned that can inform my next steps?
It's about staying flexible, adaptable, willing to adjust our course as we go.
It's like navigating by the stars. You have your compass, your map, your destination in mind.
Right.
But you also have to constantly adjust your course based on the winds, the currents, and any unexpected obstacles.
But sometimes, even with all the right tools and strategies, it's easy to get discouraged.
Yeah.
We might feel like we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back.
Absolutely.
That's when it can be hard to trust the process, right?
Yeah.
We might start to doubt ourselves.
Yeah.
And wonder if it's all worth it.
Absolutely. And that's when it's so important to remember that growth is rarely linear.
Right.
There will be ups and downs, twists and turns, moments of doubt and uncertainty, but it's in those moments that we need to hold on to our principles, our vision, and our belief in ourselves.
It's about remembering that even those setbacks can serve a purpose. They can teach us valuable lessons and redirect us towards a path that's ultimately more fulfilling.
And that brings us to the last piece of the puzzle I touched on earlier. The importance of surrounding ourselves with the right people.
Because, let's be honest, the company we keep has a huge impact on our thoughts, behaviors, and even our values.
Exactly. Who we spend time with can either fuel our ego or help us stay grounded. So it's crucial to be intentional about cultivating relationships with people who support our growth, challenge us to be our best selves, and share our core values.
So it's not about surrounding ourselves with yes men who constantly validate our ego.
Exactly.
It's about finding those friends, mentors, and colleagues who will hold us accountable, offer constructive criticism, and encourage us to stay true to our principles.
Exactly. And it's also about being mindful of the voices we allow to influence us, whether it's social media, news outlets, or even our own inner critic.
Yeah.
We need to be discerning about the messages we internalize.
Because not all voices are created equal. Some are fueled by ego. By the need to be right, to win, to dominate. Others are grounded in wisdom, compassion, and a genuine desire for growth and understanding.
Choosing to align ourselves with those wiser voices can make all the difference in navigating the inevitable challenges life throws our way. So as we wrap up our deep dive into ego is the enemy, here's a parting thought for you, our listener. Embrace the journey, even the messy parts. Trust the process, even when it feels uncertain. And remember, you are capable of more than you think.
I like that. If you find yourself struggling, remember the tools we've explored today. Visualize failure, embrace constraints, practice the full stop, reflect regularly, Trust the process and be kind to yourself. And most importantly, surround yourself with people who inspire you to be your best self.
We've all got an ego to manage. It's part of being human. But with the right mindset and strategies, we can keep it from sabotaging our success and use it as fuel for growth.
We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic that will hopefully inspire you, challenge you, and maybe even change the way you see the world. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring.